Hello, I am Tom the Tale Teller. This is the first in a series of videos where I tell you stories. I am a storyteller, born and bred in Leicestershire. I have wrote 2 books, Leicestershire Folktales for Children and Forest Folktales for Children. They're both out now, available. Leicestershire Folktales is paperback, Forest Folktales is hardback. And they're available now to buy via Amazon or in a good bookshop if you want to go out into bookshops at the moment. Now, the reason for this video and the others that I'll be releasing is I'm very aware you're going to be stuck at home. There's going to be lots of people working from home during this pandemic. Lots of people with their children at home, scared, worried, trying to home educate where possible because schools are being shut. Well, hopefully you can show them a few of my videos, show them a few stories, teach them what storytelling is, and have a bit of fun. And lots of my stories have morals that go with them. And so it teaches us something. That's what storytelling is. That's what storytelling does. The last day of school tomorrow before they close, on day of recording, I'm in school all day telling stories. But the first story I'm going to tell you is the reason why I've got this hat on. It's a story about hats. It's a story that starts like all good stories start, with a once upon a time. There lived a hat maker, and this hat maker, he made hats. Hats like this, hats like that, hats like that, this, the other. Big hats, small hats, round hats, square hats. You name it, he would make them out of leather. He would knit them. He would make them out of straw. He would make hats for every occasion. And life was good. For on a Friday, he would travel through the jungle with his hat on his head, a basket on his back, full of all the hats he'd been making all week. And he'll go to the local market on the other side of the jungle. And there he would lay out all the hats. And the people would come from miles around and bring their coin, for they would trade a coin for a hat. And at the end of the day, all his hats were gone and his pockets were full of coin. And he would take the empty basket and his own hat, which he liked, for it was very smart. He took that back through the jungle, back to his wife and his little boy. And they would sit and have dinner, and he would tell them about his day. Life was good. Until one day as he was walking through the jungle, he stumbled and tripped over absolutely nothing. And when he tripped, his hat fell off. Oh. His basket emptied all over the floor, and he banged his knee. And he rolled around on the floor just like you or I would roll around the floor going, ow, my knee, my knee, my knee. But then he looked at his knee, his great hairy legs and his knee where there wasn't any blood. There wasn't even a scratch. And my goodness, my golly, my gosh, my friends, didn't he feel daft? Well, it was a good job no one was around to see him, he thought, because then he would feel silly. He picked up his hat, he dusted it off, and he looked for the rest of his hats to fill his basket up, but they'd gone. They weren't under the trees, they weren't under the bushes, they weren't on the floor. Where were they? Well, my friends, it was at that moment when he heard a commotion, a fuss and a bother in the trees above, and when he looked up, he saw there was a troop of monkeys, all wearing hats. Yes, my friends, these cheeky monkeys had all stolen the man's hat. And the man, he looked up and he pointed at the monkeys with one finger and he said, "Oi, they're my hats." And the monkeys looked down and they pointed at him and they said, "Whoop, whoop, my hats." And they laughed. And then the man shook his fist and he said, "They're my hats, I said." And the monkeys looked down and shook their fists and said, "My hats," I said. And then the man pointed both his fingers at the monkeys and he said, "Give me back my hat." And the monkeys pointed both their fingers at the man and they said, "Give me back my hat." And they laughed and they laughed and they laughed. Well, it was at that moment that the man suddenly realised, ping, went the light bulb above his head. And he thought, these monkeys, they're copying me. I'm smarter than these monkeys. I can outwit these monkeys. I can make these monkeys look really silly. And so he looked up and he took off his head and he said, "Oi, give me back my hat." And he dropped his hat to the floor. And the monkeys all looked down and said, "Oi, give me back my hat." Woohoo! And threw their hats down to the floor too. And well, as the hats came raining down through the sky and landed upon the floor, the man picked them up and he put them in his basket. And he started pointing up at the monkeys and going, "Ha ha ha ha, monkeys, who looks silly now? Who looks silly now?" And the poor monkeys, oh, the poor monkeys, oh, they were so sad. They'd been made to look a fool. But the man didn't care. He just walked off with his basket full of hats, his hat on his head. And that day, he sold all his hats once more. Pocket full of coin, he returned home. And that night, he told his wife and his little boy all about what had happened. But he didn't tell them about the fuss he made when he hurt his knee. He said he was very brave and it didn't hurt him at all. And the little boy, he found this hilarious. He laughed, great belly laughs. And he rolled on the floor and he said, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, tell me again about those silly monkeys." And so he did. And that became a Friday tradition. After he returned home from selling the hats at market, he would tell his little boy the story of how he outwitted those silly monkeys. And so it was that story was told again and again and again. And the more it was told, the older the boy got, until eventually one day the boy was now a young man and the man was now an old man making hats. And whereas his fingers still made hats as fine as anything, his legs and his back weren't up to going through the jungle. And so on a Friday, the young man, the son of the hat maker, it was his turn. His turn to go through every Friday morning through the jungle to market, to sell the hats for the coins, bring them back and make the living. And life was good. Until one day, one Friday, as the young man was now walking through the forest, through the jungle, he fell over absolutely nothing. And his hat fell on the floor and all his hats from his basket scattered all about. And he bumped his knee and he rolled around on the ground, and you guessed it, my friends, he said, "Oh, my knee, my knee, my knee." But as he pulled up his trousers to get out his now hairy knee, because he was no longer a child but a young man, he looked at his hairy knee and he saw no blood, not even a scratch. And he thought to himself, "Oh goodness, oh golly, oh gosh, how silly do I look? Good job there was no one around to see me." And so he picked up his hat and he brushed it off. And he placed it on his head and he looked for the rest of the hats, but they'd gone. They weren't under the trees or the bushes or scattered around. Where were they? And at that moment, he heard the chattering above. And yes, you've guessed it, my friends, there they were. That troop of monkeys, all wearing hats. And the young man, he looked up and he pointed a finger and he said, "Oi, give me back my hat." And the monkeys looked down and pointed, "Oh, give me back my hat." And then he shook his fist and said, "They're my hats." And the monkeys shook their fists and said, "Oh, they're my hats." And then the boy, he remembered. He remembered the story his father had told him every Friday of how he tricked those silly monkeys and how he could do it himself. All he had to do was throw his hat on the floor and the monkeys would be so silly they would copy, because that's what they were doing. And so he threw his hat on the floor and said, "Come on, silly monkeys, throw those hats on the floor." And the monkeys said, "No." And the young man, he looked up at the monkeys and said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be throwing your hats on the floor and copying me." And the monkeys said, "No." And then a voice from behind the young man. It was an old wise monkey. And he said to the boy, the young man, he said, Why do you think we would be so daft as to copy you and throw away our lovely new hats? And the boy said, but the story my father told me all those years ago about how he tricked you. I learnt that all monkeys are silly and I could easily trick you with this little trick. And the monkeys said, well, do you not think our fathers didn't tell us stories too? And we heard that story and we learned an awful lot from it. And with that, the monkey and the rest of the troop swung off through the trees and disappeared. And the young man lost his hat, apart from his own, which he brushed off and put back on, and had to go back home and explain to his father and his mother what had happened. And you see, my friends, the important lesson from this story is there's always two sides to the story. And we take from it what we want to hear. In this case, the hat maker, when he told the story, he made those monkeys look silly because he wanted to take away from the fact that he'd made a fool of himself, and they'd probably seen. But the monkeys told a different version of the story, a story in which they learned how to not be silly and not copy. And so we can take two sides of a story, two different meanings. And I think it's really important where we are right now in the midst of this pandemic. We're getting lots of stories from lots of different sides, from scientists, from politicians, from the news, and we have to be very careful because depending on which story we hear, we can take a different point of view. And so we have to weigh it all up and consider there are many sides to this story. I really hope that's entertained you just for the last 10 minutes or so. I will be posting more. Please like, share, give me a thumbs up here on Facebook, share it on YouTube, share it on Facebook, on Twitter. Spread the word, spread the enjoyment. Let people listen to stories told in the good old-fashioned way. I can't be there in front of you as an audience and a storyteller, but I can share my stories through the wonders of technology. And it's so much nicer than a book. A book's a wonderful thing to read. And a book you can get lost in, but a story told you can share. Sit down with your family and show them on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, cast it onto your TV. Look out for more, spread the word, and I shall see you soon. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget, like and subscribe and check me out on Facebook, Tom the Tale Teller. Thank you.